"You want to put it in," she screamed. What the rancher did next outraged the whole town. The sun had just begun to rise over the small town of Willow Creek, casting a soft golden glow over the wide fields and old wooden fences. Birds chirped in the distance, and the air smelled fresh with the scent of grass and soil. On the edge of town, the rancher, a man in his late 40s named Thomas, was already up, moving around the farm with his usual careful routine. He was known in the town as a hard-working, quiet man who preferred to keep to himself, but would always help a neighbor when needed. His weathered face and strong hands told the story of a lifetime spent working the land. Thomas walked through the barn, checking the horses and making sure the feed was ready for the day. His movements were steady, confident, and precise. Every tool in the barn had its place, and every animal had its own routine. To Thomas, life was simple and straightforward. Work hard, care for the land, and respect others. He had learned early in life that nothing worth having came easily, and he carried that lesson in every action he took. This morning, however, the calm of the farm was about to be interrupted. Across the yard, the sound of a truck approaching broke the silence. It was his neighbor, Mrs. Collins, driving up with her daughter, Emily. Emily had been staying with the rancher for a few days to help out with some chores while her parents were away on a trip. She was in her early 20s, full of energy, and not afraid to speak her mind. She admired Thomas for his knowledge and experience, but sometimes found him frustrating because he could be so stubborn. Emily hopped out of the truck, stretching her arms and looking around the wide ranch. "It's beautiful here," she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. She had grown up in the town but had never spent much time on a real ranch. The sight of the horses grazing peacefully and the smell of hay made her feel both excited and nervous. Thomas looked up from the barn door and gave a small nod. "Morning, Emily, ready to start." His voice was calm, measured, and slightly rough from years of outdoor work. He didn't smile often, but when he did, it was quiet and genuine. Emily grinned. "As ready as I'll ever be." She walked toward the barn, glancing at the horses with fascination. Thomas followed her, carrying a bucket of feed. He showed her how to fill the troughs carefully, explaining which animals needed extra attention and why. Emily listened intently, trying to remember every detail. She wanted to do everything right and hoped not to make any mistakes. For a while, the morning passed peacefully. The sun climbed higher, and the ranch began to hum with life. Chickens clucked in their coop, cows mooed in the field, and the horses stirred in their stalls. Thomas and Emily worked together, the rhythm of their tasks creating a quiet sense of harmony. Then came the moment that would change the day. Thomas needed to move a large hay bale into the back of the barn. It was heavy, awkward, and required careful maneuvering. He had a plan in his mind, and he was used to doing such tasks alone, but Emily, wanting to help, stepped forward. "I can do it," she said, determined. Her enthusiasm was genuine, but Thomas could see that she didn't fully understand how heavy the bale was. Thomas raised an eyebrow. "It's heavy, Emily. You'll need to lift from here, not there. Otherwise, you might hurt yourself." She didn't like being told how to do something, even when it was for her own safety. "I know what I'm doing," she said, trying to keep her voice light but firm. "Just watch me." Emily wrapped her arms around the bale and heaved, but it didn't budge. She tried again, grunting with effort, but it barely shifted. Seeing her struggle, Thomas moved closer. "Here, let me show you," he said gently. With careful movements, he lifted one side of the bale, guiding Emily's arm so she could share the effort. Together, they managed to move it a few steps closer to the barn wall. Emily stepped back, wiping her brow. "Wow, that's heavy," she admitted, laughing nervously. "I didn't think it would be that hard." Emily, feeling a little frustrated and overwhelmed, tried to maneuver the bale into the narrow space at the back of the barn. It slipped slightly, and she let out a sharp shout, half in surprise and half in frustration. "You want to put it in," she exclaimed, her voice echoing through the barn. Thomas froze for a moment, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Her words were loud, and the way she said them carried more emotion than intention. It wasn't meant as an insult, but in the quiet barn, it sounded louder than she realized. The rancher's face remained calm, but inside, a storm was brewing. He knew she didn't mean anything disrespectful, but the words struck him in an unexpected way. He had spent his life working hard, often alone, and his pride in his work was strong. Being questioned, even indirectly, made him feel defensive. Still, he didn't respond with anger. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his hands steady as he adjusted the bale. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's get it in together. Watch my movements, follow my lead." She hadn't meant to challenge him, only to express her surprise at how difficult the task was. As Thomas guided the bale into the proper position, she realized how much skill and experience he had. What had seemed simple from the outside required patience, strength, and precision. By the time the bale was finally in place, both of them were breathing heavily, sweat dripping from their foreheads. Emily leaned against the wall, smiling sheepishly. "I guess I still have a lot to learn," she admitted. Thomas smiled faintly, a rare warmth in his eyes. "We all do," he said simply. "No one knows everything, that's why we work together." But outside, a few neighbors had caught sight of the small confrontation. In a town like Willow Creek, news traveled fast, and even small events could become stories whispered from door to door. Thomas didn't notice yet, but the day was only beginning, and the moment of misunderstanding would soon ripple far beyond the barn. Emily, too, didn't realize how one brief shout said in surprise could be misunderstood and remembered in ways she hadn't imagined. The rancher returned to his routine, feeding the other animals and checking fences, while Emily helped clean up. They worked quietly, each lost in their own thoughts. Thomas thought about how quickly people judged, and Emily thought about how much she wanted to prove herself. Neither spoke of the moment, but both felt its weight. By late morning, the sun was high, and the ranch hummed with life. The two of them finished their chores, and Emily went to fetch water for the horses. Thomas leaned against a post, watching her move. He realized that teaching her patience and respect for the work wasn't just about lifting hay bales. It was about understanding life, responsibility, and how small moments could carry unexpected meaning. The day seemed ordinary, but the first crack in the calm had appeared. A single shout, a brief misunderstanding, and a mixture of pride, frustration, and curiosity had already set the stage for the events that would soon have the whole town talking. And in the quiet of the barn, with the sun streaming through the windows, Thomas and Emily had no idea that their small struggle over a simple hay bale would lead to questions, judgments, and a lesson about human nature that neither of them would forget anytime soon. The morning continued to unfold on the ranch, but the air had changed slightly. Though the sun shone brightly, there was a subtle tension lingering, like the calm before a storm. Emily tried to focus on the tasks ahead, but her mind kept drifting back to the moment in the barn. Her voice, raised in surprise, had been louder than she intended, and she wondered if she had embarrassed Thomas. She shook her head and forced herself to concentrate, deciding to pour her energy into work rather than worry about the past few minutes. Thomas, meanwhile, moved through the ranch with his usual steady rhythm. He checked the fences, inspected the animals, and made small adjustments here and there. On the surface, he appeared calm and unbothered, but inside he was reflecting on the interaction with Emily. He was not angry, but he felt the stirrings of frustration. It was not her fault, he knew that, but in a small town, news traveled fast, and he knew how easily a minor misunderstanding could become gossip. By late morning, Emily had finished cleaning the stables and was helping Thomas load feed into the truck. They worked side by side, the rhythm of their movements creating a quiet sense of teamwork. Emily admired Thomas's efficiency. Every motion was precise, every step had a purpose. She realized she had much to learn, not just about physical work, but about patience, planning, and observing small details. As they lifted the last bag of feed into the truck, Emily glanced at Thomas and hesitated. She wanted to speak, to apologize for her loud outburst earlier, but the words got caught in her throat. Instead, she offered a small, sincere smile. Thomas noticed it and nodded slightly, understanding without words. The tension between them seemed to ease, though a quiet awareness lingered. Both knew the moment in the barn was only the beginning of a larger story. After loading the feed, Thomas decided it was time to move the tractor to the field for plowing. Emily followed, eager to see how the heavy machinery worked. The tractor was large and intimidating at first, but Thomas guided her through the process, explaining every lever, pedal, and control. Emily listened carefully, asking questions and observing how naturally Thomas moved as if the machine were an extension of himself. "You make it look easy," Emily said, shading her eyes against the sun. Thomas smiled faintly, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's all practice and patience. You can't rush these things." Thomas suggested they take a short break before preparing the evening chores. Emily sat on the porch steps, drinking water, while Thomas leaned against the railing, his eyes scanning the fields. The sun was warm, but the gentle breeze brought relief, rustling the tall grass in soft waves. It was during this quiet moment that a neighbor, Mrs. Peters, approached the ranch on foot. She was well known in town for being observant and talkative. Her presence always meant that news, sometimes accurate, sometimes exaggerated, would soon spread. "Hello, Thomas," she called cheerfully, waving. "And Emily, how's the work going today?" Peter's eyes. That twinkle often meant she had already heard some gossip or was about to start one. "Oh, I heard something interesting this morning," Mrs. Peters began, leaning slightly on her walking stick. "I saw Emily in the barn struggling with the hay bale. Quite a sight, I hear." She laughed lightly, as if sharing a secret. Emily froze. She wasn't sure if Thomas had heard, but she could feel her face growing warm. She opened her mouth to explain, but Mrs. Peters continued, oblivious to the tension. "Of course," Thomas helped, "but I must say that woman's spirit is impressive. And your patience, Thomas. Everyone in town will be talking about it." "It was just a small task, nothing to worry about." Thomas sighed, looking out over the fields. "Most likely. People always notice and small towns are quick to talk. But that's not your problem, Emily. Just focus on your work and your intentions. Others will talk, but their words don't change who you are or what you've done." She wanted to believe him, but the weight of gossip in such a small place felt heavy. Even a small misunderstanding could grow larger than reality. Later that afternoon, Thomas decided to check the perimeter fences. Emily volunteered to help, wanting to prove she could handle responsibilities without mishap. They walked along the long stretches of fencing, checking posts and tightening wires where needed. Emily struggled with some sections, especially where the ground was uneven, but Thomas guided her carefully. "Step here, hold the post there, and be careful with the wire," Thomas instructed. "It may seem tricky, but if you take it slow, it works out." Thomas suggested they finish up and head back to the barn to clean tools and put away supplies. Emily walked beside him, feeling tired but proud. She realized that working on a ranch required patience, strength, and constant attention. It was hard work, but it also brought a strange sense of satisfaction. As they returned to the barn, Thomas paused. "You did well today, Emily. You faced challenges, learned from them, and didn't give up. That's what matters most. Everyone makes mistakes. It's how we respond that counts." She realized that the rancher was more than a man who worked the land. He was someone who carried responsibility, patience, and care in everything he did. But even as the day ended peacefully, the memory of the barn incident lingered. Emily couldn't shake the thought that whispers of the moment might already be circulating in town. Thomas, too, felt a quiet awareness that the day's events had caught the attention of others. He didn't worry too much about gossip. He had learned over the years that people would always talk, but he knew that the next day might bring unexpected questions or judgments. For now, though, they focused on the work they could control. The animals were fed, the tools were cleaned, and the ranch was secure for the night. Emily felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. She knew that her time on the ranch was more than just physical labor. It was an opportunity to learn life lessons, face challenges, and grow stronger in ways she hadn't expected. Thomas watched her with quiet approval, knowing that she had potential, even if she didn't realize it yet. He understood the difficulties of being young, eager, and sometimes impatient. He had been there once, and he remembered the frustration of not knowing enough or being underestimated. As the last light faded from the sky, Thomas and Emily walked to the house, the soft sounds of the ranch surrounding them. The day had been long and the work had been demanding, but both felt a sense of accomplishment. Emily felt proud of what she had learned, and Thomas felt satisfied in teaching and guiding her. Little did they know, though, that the events of the day, the shouting in the barn, the whispered conversations, and the small misunderstandings, were already beginning to stir curiosity among the townspeople. By morning, the story would grow, and the ranch would become the center of attention in ways neither of them had anticipated. And so, as night fell over Willow Creek, the ranch stood quiet and calm, but a subtle tension lingered in the air, hinting that the peaceful day had been only the beginning. The stage was set for a story that would challenge patience, judgment, and understanding, drawing the entire town into a tale of surprise, learning, and unexpected reactions. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over Willow Creek, painting the fields and fences with a soft, golden light. Birds sang cheerfully, and the air smelled crisp and fresh. On the ranch, Thomas was already moving about, performing his morning routine with quiet efficiency. The day promised more work, and Thomas preferred to get a head start. Emily appeared at the barn a little later, carrying a bucket of feed. She had been thinking all night about the events of the previous day. She felt nervous, as though the brief shouting incident in the barn had been magnified somehow. Even though Thomas had said it was nothing to worry about, Emily couldn't help but wonder if neighbors had already noticed. "Morning, Thomas," she said softly, trying to sound cheerful. "Morning," Thomas replied, nodding. His tone was calm, but he sensed her unease. He had learned that patience was important, especially when someone was feeling anxious. Emily started feeding the animals, trying to focus on her tasks. However, she could hear the faint rumble of a vehicle approaching the ranch from the road. Soon enough, she saw Mr. Higgins, another neighbor, walking toward the barn. He was an older man, friendly but extremely curious about everything happening in town. His presence usually meant news or gossip was about to spread. "Morning, Thomas." "Morning, Emily," Mr. Higgins called cheerfully. "I heard yesterday there was quite a scene in the barn. Everything all right?" His face remained calm, but his eyes reflected a small flicker of irritation. He knew that small towns thrived on gossip, and news traveled faster than the wind. "Everything's fine," Thomas said evenly. "Just a misunderstanding, nothing more." "And Thomas, your patience is impressive as always." He laughed lightly, as if recounting a small adventure. Emily smiled nervously, nodding. It was nothing, really. Even though Thomas tried to keep things calm, she realized that in Willow Creek, everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. The barn incident, small as it was, had already become a topic of curiosity. After the brief visit, Thomas suggested they check on the north pasture. The cows had been restless the previous day, and he wanted to ensure the fences were secure. Emily eagerly agreed, hoping to focus on work rather than worry about the town's whispers. As they walked across the pasture, Emily tried to absorb the peacefulness of the surroundings. The tall grass swayed in the gentle breeze, and the sound of cows lowing in the distance created a soft rhythm that felt comforting. For a moment, she almost forgot about yesterday's tension. But then Thomas paused near a fence post that had loosened in the soil. He knelt and began adjusting it carefully. Emily wanted to help but struggled to hold the post steady. "Here, let me try," she said, determined to do something useful. Thomas shook his head slightly. "Watch me first. You'll understand better if you see the correct way to do it." "Good job," Thomas said, nodding. You're learning quickly." It seemed that the story of yesterday had spread faster than she expected. Whispers floated in the air, and she could sense curious eyes watching their every move. Thomas noticed the attention but didn't seem to mind. He had grown used to the town's constant curiosity over the years. He knew that people would always talk, and the best way to deal with it was to continue with life and work, ignoring unnecessary drama. Emily, however, felt uneasy. She had always been aware of gossip in Willow Creek, but now she experienced it firsthand. Each glance, each whisper, felt like a magnifying glass, turning her small mistake into something much larger in her mind. "Don't worry about them," Thomas said quietly, noticing her concern. "People will always talk. You focus on your work and intentions, and that's all that matters." Emily helped clean the stables, collected eggs, and checked water troughs, while Thomas worked on repairs and prepared the equipment for the next day. Despite the town's attention, their teamwork began to strengthen. Emily learned to anticipate his movements, and Thomas grew more patient as he guided her. Around midday, a group of children from the town approached the ranch. They had heard bits and pieces of the story from their parents and were curious to see what had happened. Emily watched as Thomas greeted them politely, maintaining his calm demeanor. The children, sensing the tension, were careful not to interfere but asked a few innocent questions about the barn and the animals. Emily answered with simple honesty, explaining her struggles with the hay bale and how Thomas had helped her. Her openness seemed to diffuse some of the curiosity, and the children left with smiles and a better understanding of the work involved on the ranch. By mid-afternoon, Emily felt tired but satisfied. She had learned a lot and had begun to feel more confident in her abilities. The barn incident, though still on her mind, no longer felt as overwhelming. She realized that mistakes were part of learning, and that patience, observation, and cooperation were essential skills, not just for ranch work, but for life itself. Thomas, too, reflected on the day. He thought about how easily small misunderstandings could become the focus of gossip, and how quickly people judged without knowing the full story. He appreciated Emily's efforts and resilience, recognizing that she had faced the challenges with courage, even when feeling nervous and uncertain. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the fields, Thomas and Emily finished their final tasks. The animals were fed, the tools were cleaned, and the fences were secure. Emily felt a deep sense of accomplishment and gratitude. She had learned valuable lessons about patience, hard work, and handling public attention. Thomas, observing her satisfaction, felt a quiet pride. Teaching was more than showing someone how to perform tasks. It was guiding them to understand the principles behind their actions, helping them gain confidence, and preparing them to face challenges independently. As they walked back to the barn to store the last of the supplies, Emily asked softly, "Thomas, do you think people will always talk about this?" "That's what lasts, not gossip." As the last light faded from Willow Creek, Emily looked around the ranch, feeling a sense of belonging. The day had been challenging, filled with lessons, small victories, and moments of reflection. She knew that the events of yesterday would continue to ripple through the town, but she also knew that she had grown stronger, more aware, and more capable because of them. Thomas, standing nearby, watched the sunset with quiet satisfaction. He knew the coming days might bring more attention, more questions, and perhaps more misunderstandings. But he also knew that the important work was being done, the work of teaching, learning, and building character. And in the peaceful glow of the evening, he felt confident that both he and Emily were ready to face whatever came next. And so, as night settled over Willow Creek, the ranch stood calm and serene, a place of lessons, growth, and quiet strength. The day's events had left their mark, not just on the land, but on the hearts and minds of those who worked it, setting the stage for challenges, revelations, and unexpected actions that would soon capture the attention of the entire town. The next morning dawned crisp and clear over Willow Creek. A soft breeze stirred the tall grass, and the smell of earth and dew filled the air. Thomas rose early, as always, moving through his routine with quiet determination. Though he had long accepted the curiosity and gossip of the town, he could feel the whispers from yesterday lingering, carrying themselves through the streets and fields. He knew people were talking, and some were waiting to see what he would do next. Emily arrived shortly after, carrying her bucket of feed and a small notebook where she had started jotting down her observations and lessons. She had begun keeping notes, realizing that working on a ranch involved more than just strength. It required planning, observation, and reflection. She hoped to remember every detail and improve her skills. "Good morning, Thomas," she said, her voice steady. "Morning, Emily," Thomas replied. His eyes swept the fields as he considered the tasks for the day. "Today we have some work that might interest the neighbors. It's challenging, but it will help the ranch and the town. Come with me. Not just for the ranch, but for the whole community. We'll show them that hard work and careful action speak louder than gossip." As they began fixing the fence, neighbors started arriving quietly, curious about the activity. Mrs. Peters appeared first, followed by several others, including Mr. Higgins. They stood at a distance, whispering among themselves, their eyes fixed on the two working on the fence. Emily felt a flutter of nerves. She knew the town had talked about her shouting in the barn, and now their eyes were on her again. She glanced at Thomas, hoping for guidance. Thomas, sensing her hesitation, smiled reassuringly. "Focus on your work, Emily. Don't worry about the onlookers. They'll see what's important soon enough." As the morning wore on, more townspeople gathered, curious about what Thomas had planned. They murmured to each other, speculating about the incident in the barn and what Thomas might do to respond. Some expected anger or retaliation, while others wondered if he would simply ignore the attention. Thomas worked methodically, his calm demeanor contrasting with the growing curiosity of the crowd. Emily noticed the difference between his actions and the whispered assumptions. While the town imagined drama or confrontation, Thomas demonstrated patience, skill, and careful thought. By late morning, the fence was almost complete. Thomas stepped back and surveyed the work. Each post was straight, each wire tight, and the section was now secure. Emily beamed with pride. She had not only learned the technical skills, but had also witnessed a different way of handling attention and judgment. Then came the moment that caught the town completely by surprise. Thomas picked up a small pile of scrap wood and nails that had been discarded near the barn. Using his skills and ingenuity, he began constructing a small shelter for the animals, reinforcing an area that had been damaged by weather. He worked efficiently, explaining his process to Emily as he went. "See, Emily," he said, "sometimes the best response to misunderstanding isn't words or arguments. It's action. Show your intentions through what you do, not what you say." Thomas was taking a moment that many expected to be private or defensive and turning it into a public display of care and competence. Emily could see their expressions shift from curiosity to admiration. Whispers of amazement began circulating. People realized that the rancher they thought might react harshly or stubbornly was instead working quietly, constructively, and generously. By midday, the small shelter was complete. It stood sturdy and well-built, providing safety for the animals and improving the ranch at the same time. Thomas stepped back and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked at Emily and nodded. "You see what I mean?" he asked. "Actions speak louder than words. You've seen how patience, skill, and responsibility can change what people think of a situation." Peters, who had been watching closely, walked up and spoke first. "Well, Thomas," she said, "I must admit this is remarkable. Not many would have taken the time to do this for the animals and the town. You've shown patience and skill, and Emily, you've helped as well. I think everyone here has learned something today." Some even offered words of praise and thanks. Thomas accepted their compliments quietly, his focus always returning to the work at hand rather than seeking recognition. Emily felt a warm pride, knowing she had played a part in the effort and had grown through the experience. By late afternoon, the town's perception had begun to shift. The gossip that had once seemed critical or judgmental was replaced by stories of admiration for Thomas's actions and Emily's contribution. People whispered not about a shouting incident in the barn, but about the skill, care, and dedication they had witnessed firsthand. Emily realized that she had also learned a vital lesson about courage, not the kind shown in loud or dramatic ways, but the courage to act wisely, responsibly, and selflessly, even when being watched or judged. Thomas, observing her thoughtful expression, spoke gently. "Remember, Emily, people will always talk, but what truly matters is how you respond. You can't control every opinion, but you can control your actions. That is where character is built." The narrative had shifted, and the town's respect for Thomas and for Emily's efforts had grown. Emily and Thomas walked back toward the barn, tired but satisfied. The day had been long and demanding, but it had been transformative in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. Emily felt a deep sense of accomplishment and pride, and Thomas felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that his actions had taught lessons not only to Emily but to the whole town. As night settled over Willow Creek, the ranch glowed in the soft light of the setting sun. The air was calm, and the animals rested peacefully. The events of the day had left a lasting impression, showing that patience, skill, and integrity could change minds and hearts in ways words often could not. Emily looked at Thomas with admiration. "I understand now," she said softly. "It's not just about the work, it's about how you do it and why. That's what people notice. And now you understand it too. That is the lesson I wanted you to see." It had been a turning point, not only for the town's perception but also for Emily's growth, Thomas's teaching, and the demonstration of how quiet, thoughtful actions could speak louder than words. And as Willow Creek settled into night, the story of the rancher's calm, constructive, and unexpected action began to spread, turning a small incident into a tale of respect, patience, and the power of character, a lesson that the town would remember for a long time. The following morning, Willow Creek awoke to a quiet but lively energy. Birds chirped in the fresh dawn, and the light mist over the fields glistened as the sun began to rise. The town seemed calm, yet a subtle excitement hung in the air. News of Thomas's actions the previous day had spread, and curiosity lingered among the townspeople. Emily arrived early at the ranch, carrying her bucket of feed. She felt a sense of anticipation, mixed with pride. She had witnessed Thomas handle the barn incident with patience, skill, and wisdom, and she had learned a great deal about how actions could speak louder than words. Today, she hoped, would be a day to reflect on those lessons and perhaps experience the final resolution of the story that had drawn the town's attention. "Morning, Thomas," Emily said cheerfully, though a hint of nervousness lingered in her voice. "Morning," Thomas replied, nodding. His expression was calm, but he sensed the anticipation in the air. He knew the town had begun forming opinions, and he also knew that people often waited for closure or proof of intention before changing their perceptions. Together, they walked toward the barn to begin morning chores. Emily carried the feed while Thomas checked the fences and prepared for the day. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. The animals moved quietly, sensing the calm and order of the ranch. Soon, a few neighbors began to appear at the edge of the property, walking closer than usual. They had heard about the repaired fence and the new animal shelter, and they wanted to see the results for themselves. Mrs. Peters, Mr. Higgins, and several others approached with cautious curiosity. Unlike the day before, there was no whispering or speculation, only quiet observation and polite interest. Emily noticed the difference and felt a small sense of relief. The tension of the previous days, when gossip had dominated the town's attention, seemed to be easing. She realized that Thomas's actions had begun to shift perceptions in a meaningful way. Thomas, aware of the watching neighbors, continued his work calmly. He showed Emily how to distribute feed evenly among the animals, demonstrating techniques that ensured no animal went without. Emily followed his lead, careful and attentive, applying everything she had learned over the past few days. As they worked, Thomas paused and spoke to the small gathering of townspeople. "I know many of you have heard about the incident in the barn," he said quietly but firmly. "It was a misunderstanding. There was no harm done. What matters is that we take responsibility, work hard, and care for the animals and the land. That is the lesson I hope everyone will take away." People realized that the story they had been whispering about was not one of anger or conflict, but of patience, cooperation, and responsible action. Emily felt a sense of pride. She had played a part in the work, learned important lessons, and witnessed firsthand how integrity and calm actions could influence others. She understood now that misunderstandings were a natural part of life, but the way one responded to them could define character far more than the mistake itself. By mid-morning, the town's interest had shifted entirely. Neighbors who had previously been curious or judgmental began offering compliments and words of appreciation. "Thomas, the fence looks great. And that shelter, it's perfect for the animals," Mrs. Peters said warmly. Emily smiled, grateful for the recognition but more focused on the lessons she had learned. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I helped too, and it was a great learning experience." It's about learning patience, responsibility, and respect. Actions show who we are more clearly than words ever can. There was no tension, no judgment, only calm, focused work and a sense of accomplishment. Later in the afternoon, Emily and Thomas took a break near the edge of the pasture. Emily sat quietly, reflecting on the events of the past days. She realized how much she had grown in confidence, patience, and understanding. The experience had taught her not just about ranch work, but about life, human nature, and how to handle challenges gracefully. Thomas watched her quietly, recognizing the transformation. He had seen young people like Emily struggle, make mistakes, and sometimes lose confidence. But he had also seen them rise, learn, and become stronger through guidance and experience. He knew that Emily's growth was a testament to her determination and willingness to learn. "You've come a long way in a short time," Thomas said finally, breaking the silence. "Not just in work, but in understanding. Mistakes happen, Emily, but how you respond to them is what defines you. I see how important it is to act thoughtfully, to be patient, and to take responsibility. And I see how actions can speak louder than words." The animals rested peacefully in their secure areas, the fences held strong, and the shelter provided comfort for those in need. The town had shifted from curiosity to respect, understanding the true character of the rancher and the value of careful, responsible action. Emily walked beside Thomas back toward the barn, feeling a deep sense of belonging. She had not only learned valuable practical skills, but she had also witnessed an example of integrity and patience that would stay with her forever. The barn incident, once a source of embarrassment and tension, had transformed into a powerful lesson in growth, respect, and community perception. As they finished their tasks for the day, Thomas took a moment to reflect. He realized that misunderstandings and gossip were inevitable in small towns, but thoughtful, constructive action could turn potential conflict into respect. By staying calm, working diligently, and demonstrating care, he had been able to influence not only Emily's growth but also the town's understanding of the situation. Emily, watching Thomas carefully, felt a quiet sense of admiration. She realized that leadership was not about loud words or displays of authority. It was about setting an example through actions, showing patience, and guiding others with respect and care. She felt grateful for the opportunity to learn from him, and for the lessons that would continue to guide her in the future. As night fell over Willow Creek, the ranch was bathed in the soft glow of the moon. The animals rested, the fences stood firm, and the shelter remained sturdy and welcoming. Emily and Thomas walked back to the farmhouse, tired but fulfilled. They knew the story of the barn incident had reached the town, but now it had been replaced with stories of respect, growth, and responsibility. In the quiet of the evening, Emily spoke softly. "I think I understand why you handled everything the way you did. You showed that actions matter more than words, and that patience and care can change how people see things. Remember, every challenge is an opportunity to show who you are, not just what you can do." The lesson was clear. Understanding, patience, and constructive action could overcome misunderstandings, and the character of a person was revealed most clearly through their deeds. As the stars appeared in the night sky, Thomas and Emily stood on the porch, looking out over the quiet fields. The ranch was calm, orderly, and full of life. They had both learned valuable lessons about work, patience, and human nature. The barn incident, once a point of tension, had become a symbol of growth, integrity, and the power of thoughtful action. Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude and accomplishment. She had not only contributed to the ranch, but had also learned lessons that would guide her for the rest of her life. Thomas, watching the stars reflect on the fields, felt a quiet pride in the progress she had made, and in the way the town had come to understand the value of patience and integrity. And so, Willow Creek settled into night, the ranch standing as a testament to hard work, responsibility, and quiet strength. The story that had begun with a small misunderstanding had ended with lessons in respect, community, and the power of actions to change hearts and minds. Both Thomas and Emily had grown through the experience, and the town had been reminded that character is revealed not in words alone, but in what we do, day by day, with care and intention.